Verbal communication is a skill that we use in our everyday lives, but do you ever sit back and actually think about the effects it has on pretty much everything we do and what our world would be like without verbal communication skills? We often don't consider its effects it has on our relationships, identity, self-esteem, and even technology. In the next few minutes, I will be identifying 3 reasons why learning about verbal communication is so important. First, I will be talking about how verbal communication is the foundation on which meaning is created. Second, I will be talking about how verbal communication plays a huge role in identity and relationship development within ourselves. And third, I will be talking about how people's verbal communication skills can impede or improve the relationships they have in their personal lives. So, even though nonverbal communication is very important, verbal communication is the foundation on which meaning is created. If you don't believe me, try conveying this message to a friend only using nonverbal communication. I failed my exam because last night when I was trying to study, I locked my keys in my car and I couldn't get my textbook until well after midnight. If you tried saying that to a friend using only nonverbal communication, they would likely not understand what you were trying to say, you wouldn't get your point across, and you would both end up being frustrated because the message you're trying to get across to them isn't clear. Another example of this happening would be if you visited a country where you didn't know the language. Yeah, you could use nonverbal communication and get basic points across, but in the end, nonverbal communication can only get you so far and be very limited with what you'll be able to do while you're in that country. Verbal communication also plays a huge role in identity and relationship development. Labels used to describe individuals can influence their self-concepts and self-esteem in a positive or negative way. Another form of verbal communication that can affect someone's personal identity or self-esteem is the language they use. There was a study where they studied bilingual and multilingual people, and it showed that when they switched between languages, personalities, their perceptions, and behavior changed with the language that they were using. This happens because when you learn a certain language, you also learn the culture that comes with that language, meaning you learn the beliefs, the ideas, the values, and the norms of that language. So when you change from one language to another, you're also changing your personality. A lot of people don't realize that it's happening. Even the person who is changing doesn't realize that's happening. It's kind of like a self-conscious thing. Finally, verbal communication can affect the relationships that we have in our everyday lives. There's a study that showed that families who eat meals together daily are more familiar with their family's histories, they have higher self-esteem, they interact better with peers, and they recover better from tragic events. Now that I've gone over how verbal communication can affect you in all areas of your life, such as your identity, your self-esteem, your relationships, I think that I've made it very clear that it is important to learn about verbal communication and that we should focus on the effects it has on our everyday life. Thank you.
Did you guys know that language is a structured system of communication? So today I'll be talking to you guys about verbal communication. First, I'll be talking to you guys about the 7 functions of language. Second, I'll be going into the 4 components of language. And third, I'll be letting you guys know the rules of communication. So you must be wondering, what is the function of language? Well, it's the way words are able to convey meaning, emotion, and provide an action. The first one is going to be instrumental. It's usually used when you need something. For example, I want water. The second one is going to be regulatory. You're telling others what to do. For example, when your sibling comes into the room, you're going to tell them to go away. The third one is informative. You're letting others know information or facts. For example, I have black hair. The fourth one is going to be heuristic. This one, you're gaining more information about your environment. For example, why is there a blue stain on the couch? The fifth one is going to be interrational. You're making contact with others so you're able to form bonds. For example, when you tell your parents that you appreciate them. The sixth one is personal language. It's how you're able to express your personality. For example, someone might be using sarcasm as a way to express their sense of humor. The last one is going to be imaginative. This one is how you're able to express your language in an artistic way. For example, when you're telling a story. Now you know the 7 functions of language, I'll be talking to you guys about the 4 components of language. The first one is going to be phonology, the sound of the word. For example, pop-up. In the word pop-up, you're able to hear 2 sounds of the letter P. The next one is going to be syntax. This one is the way words are ordered so it makes sense and others are able to understand. For example, Perry ate the apple. Sounds better than ate the apple Perry. The third one is going to be semantics, the meaning of the word. For example, toy block. There's 3 meanings for the word toy block. The first one is a toy. The second one could be a cube, or the third one could be a block. The last one is pragmatics. It's how we're able to use words in a practical sense, and it's usually used in contrast with semantics. For example, will you crack open the door, please? It's getting hot in here. We're letting, semantically, we know the word crack means to break, but pragmatically, we know that the speaker is trying to tell us that to open the door a little bit to let air in. Now you know the 4 components of language, I'll talk to you guys about the rules of communication. The first one is going to be conversational rule. It's how we communicate in an organized way. For example, when you're talking with your friends, you're going to talk one after the other. You're not going to talk over one another. The second one is going to be contextual rule. This is how you're speaking depending on your circumstances. For example, the way you talk at school to your friends is going to be different from the way you talk to your family at home. Now you know the ways of verbal communication. Jack is going to talk next.
There are several reasons for verbal communication that have a major impact on how we speak and how we talk to others. The main reasons are gender and age, regionality and race, as well as education and occupation. So first let's discuss gender and age. So gender actually has a huge effect on men and women because men and women both speak in different and basically unique ways. Many people have come to believe that men and women in the US actually use different dialects when speaking, and there are stereotypes about men and women that women are actually more kind and concerned when speaking about others, and men are more independent and forceful. So age is also a very big important role, and basically the most prominent example of this is they use younger and older people use different words. So younger people will typically use slangs in order to communicate with others because they want to fit in, and older people will actually explain to younger people because they have basically a fully developed mind, and they will be able to explain to them in a much easier way that they can understand. So this is how gender and age both affect how we communicate with others. So now that I basically explained gender and age, I want to go into race and regionality. So where you live will heavily impact on how you speak and what kind of words you use. For example, some people will pronounce the word oil as Earl, like E-A-R-L, and some will actually use a Y in oil instead of an I in the middle. And this originally, the different dialects, or how you speak, actually originally came from 2 colonists in the United States. One was from the north and one was from the south. And this is why in some areas of the United States, people say certain words or they speak differently than other people do. And race is also very basically affected as well on how we speak, because race basically, like if you say you're Latino and you learn Spanish before English, Um, a lot of the time when speaking Spanish, they will say things how they would say it in Spanish. So they will say the truck big instead of the big truck because the truck big would be the way to say it in Spanish, and that's the order it would be in. And also code switching is something that is typically used by a lot of people by race when speaking, namely African Americans, because they want to be able to fit in with other people, and that's how that happens. So finally, now that I've discussed race and regionality, race and regionality, I want to talk about education and occupation. So with education and occupation, it influences how you speak because say you have two doctors, those doctors will relatively speak the same because they were educated the same way. They know basically the same information. So as well as if you went to you get a college degree, you will typically have a different language and communication skill than someone who only graduated, let's say high school, and only has a high school diploma. So basically, these are all the different types of ways that verbal communication has an effect on us. And the reasons were, first, it was gender and age. And then after, I talked about race and regionality. And finally, I talked about education and occupation. And yeah, these are just the main ways that verbal communication has an effect on us. Thank you. I will now pass it to Ariane.
Thank you, Jack, for going over verbal communications. I would like to take the next few minutes and shift our focus onto language, perspective, and power. The three main topics I'll be discussing in my presentation will be language and perspective, power and accent, as well as power and identity labels. Alright, so starting off my presentation, I would like to discuss language and perspective. So all languages, whether it be English, Spanish, French, Japanese, Chinese, any language that you would speak, they all have a formal and expressive power in which it helps us to communicate our ideas, beliefs, as well as desires with one another. Many people would claim that ideas can be easily spread or influenced in any spoken language despite not having any influence of vocabulary in their way of being spoken. Whereas on the opposite side, people have argued that languages serve for the voice in the back of our head, as well as it helps us clear out our ideas by using vocab, which is why many cultures or many languages are able to speak to each other. For example, English and Japanese may have different vocab structures, but there's always a root cause for each vocab structure. Alright, so as we have discussed language and perspective, I would like to talk about power and accent. So I think everyone has heard of the stereotypes that it is hard to understand Asian people or Indian people. For me, I cannot understand my dad because he is Indian and has a very thick Indian accent. So whenever he tells me to do something, for example, take out the trash or give my dog food, it would be very difficult to understand him with his accent. But same goes for him, as he's not able to understand my American accent because we both grew up in different parts of the world, where he grew up in India and I spent a lot of my childhood here in the States. So throughout the course of history, language has been able to establish people into multiple groups, you would say, whereas English would be primarily spoken in European countries, which would have them established as a powerful majority on the other hand. And English spoken in countries that would be considered lesser to European nations such as India, it would be seen as a negative stereotype, as the European would think that, oh, the Indian population is referring to the power that we once had over their country back then. Finally, as we have gone over power and accent, I would like to go over my last topic and discuss power and identity labels. So powerful groups would label members of another separate group without any help from that group that they're trying to label. So a good example of this can be calling someone in a different group a racial slur, and they would not approve of it, or making fun of their preferences without their group backing them up. So a clear example could be, say I'm playing video games with my friends and we're all talking, and out of nowhere someone says, "Hey yo, why is Arian acting sus?" Or, "Arian, don't say that, that's very sus of you." First of all, that's not sus, I'm straight. yeah, I'm straight. And so that identity label of me making me seem sus is a label, as I've not approved of it, or other friends of my group have not approved of it. So the concept of identity label seems to be normalized everywhere. For example, when people would go to the doctors, they would want a female doctor over a male doctor, or some people would want a male doctor over a female doctor. And that would bring on to stereotypes, referring back to our previous section. So if I was told you to imagine a nurse, majority of the people would think of a female. Or if someone was told you to think of an NBA player, you would think of an African American descent. This has caused many stereotypes that we now know today. So in conclusion, we have gone over the three main factors that play into language, perspective, and power. The first one was effects of language and perspective, and then we moved on from power and accent, and then we ended off our discussion with power and identity labels. So now I'd like to switch over to Olympia.
Thanks, Arian. About 1.5 billion people speak English. That's 20% of Earth's population. With that amount, you know lots of conversations are happening. Therefore, in this presentation, I will be identifying and giving examples for 1. Confirming communication, 2. Disconfirming communication, and 3. Hate speech. Confirming communication is confirming messages that validate positive self-images of others. An example of this could be, if my friend told me she was talking to her crush, I might respond by saying, "OMG, I am so proud of you. I know how scary it is to put yourself out there, but you still did it, and now look at you." Or another example could be, if my friend told me she just got a job, I might respond by saying, "Congrats, I know how difficult interviews and applications may be, but you still did it and now you got your job." Although confirming communication is wonderful, there is such a thing as disconfirming communication. And disconfirming communication occurs when people make comments that reject or invalidate the self-image of others. So you could think of this as the opposite of confirming communication. And some examples for disconfirming communication could be, if my friend told me they got an A on their test, I might respond by saying, "Oh, it was probably an easy test." Or if another friend told me they got first place on their race, I might respond by saying, "Oh, you probably raced against a slow school." These are just examples to show you how I am invalidating what they are saying. Although disconfirming communication is hurtful, there is such a thing as hate speech. And hate speech is using verbal communication to attack others based on someone's social category, such as race, ethnicity, religion, and sexuality. There are lots of examples for hate speech. Some examples that come to mind are all Mexicans are rapists, all Muslims are terrorists, gay people shouldn't exist. Just anything that creates hate can be seen as hate speech, which of course brings up a controversial question of, should hate speech be banned? The reason why we can say such hateful things is because of our First Amendment, the freedom of speech, which makes you think, is this okay? In this presentation, I have identified and given examples to 1. Confirming communication, 2. Disconfirming communication, and 3. Hate speech. Because you are a part of the 1.5 billion people that speak English, it's good to know how to identify the conversations you are having. So now that you have learned about all these things, I am going to pass it on to Coco, who is going to continue with verbal communication. Thank you.
Many people want to improve their communication skills, but don't really know how. In the next few minutes, I'll talk to you about the two different methods you can use to improve your communication skills. First, I'll discuss with you why the I statement is very useful when you're trying to improve your communication skills. Second, realizing that language is very powerful can also make you a better communicator. I statements can be helpful because it's a way for you to express your feelings, even the bad ones. And it also displays less negativity, which means that the person you're trying to talk to doesn't go into defensive mode and not listen. It is definitely better than a you statement because you're focusing on what you're currently feeling instead of the problems that the other person is displaying. An example of an I statement is, I feel like I'm not an important friend to you because you only talk to me when you want to, or only come to me when you need something from me. So I don't want to be your friend anymore. Language can be very powerful because of what you say can change how the other person feels or what they're going to do later on. An example of that is when a kid goes to their parents for help with the current situation they're in at school. Maybe for things like bullying. They go to their parents about the bullying problems they have at school and they want help from the parents. But the parents only to tell them that it's probably their own fault, or maybe they did something to annoy the bully. That's why they're getting bullied in the first place. As a kid, hearing that from a parent is very hurtful because they are the ones that brought them to this world and they are the ones they trusted the most. Maybe later on in life the kid will not receive any help from the parents because they don't want to. Maybe they're scared to ask them for help again. And they'll be very resentful of the parent. And they're most likely to keep things to themselves and not talk to anyone about it. That can often lead to a lot of mental health issues and maybe result in death because they refuse to tell others about things like this. In conclusion, people want to improve their communication skills but don't really know how. First, I talked to you about the I statement and how that can help. Second, I explain why language is very powerful and can cause harm. After all being said, mastering these methods can make you a better communicator to you and those around you.